long COVID, and also because of the population around the world aging. So beyond the moral imperative for including people with disabilities in the decisions we make in businesses, both from a workplace perspective and just as importantly from a design and business model perspective, it's also really good business. So there's been plenty of research that has shown that companies that do this outperform their peers in everything from profitability to innovation and pretty much everything in between. So what is inclusive design? It's not just accessibility, it's really involving customers who live with disabilities in every part of the process so that they are informing decisions from the very beginning all the way through development of products and services. And so the other thing that's really important about that is that products that are more inclusive don't just create new ways for people with disabilities to participate in social and economic life, they also end up with products and services that tend to be better for everybody else as well. And the private sector has been increasingly important in making this happen. And part of that is due to Caroline here and the World Economic Forum. So at the annual meeting in 2019, a collective of 500 businesses launched something called the Valuable 500. And I was here that year, and I remember how much buzz there was about it. It was amazing. And it's an initiative with the objective of setting a new global standard for workplace equality and disability inclusion. It engages 500 private sector corporations to be the tipping point for change and to unlock the business, social, and economic value of those 1.3 billion people living with disabilities around the world. So I will introduce our panelists and we'll get going. So Caroline Casey is the founder and director of the Valuable 500. Sigve Brekke is the president and chief executive officer of Telenor Group in Norway. Ellen Shook is the chief leadership and human resources officer of Accenture, based in the UK. And David Kenny is the CEO of Nielsen, based, I believe, in the same building as me in New York City.
That's correct. 675, 67.
So thank you all so much for being here. Just a quick reminder, if you are going to tweet about this panel, which please do if you are moved to do so, use the hashtag WEF22. And there will be a Q&A after the session, and so please, please, please ask questions. All right, so first, we are going to go to you, Sigve. I would love to know, based on your experience, what are the most important steps that companies need to take to ensure that they are designing and developing really technically accessible and inclusive products and services?
Yeah, thanks for joining this panel, and thanks for the question. Let me just start with a couple of numbers. My company, we are operating across Europe, across the Nordics and Asia, 170 million customers. But I'm also representing the GSMA board, which is an association of all mobile companies in the world, counting for 5 billion customers. So the first step is to acknowledge the issue. In the GSMA association, we have started to look at what can we do. We have then, together with sponsors, starting to look at different programs where we can sponsor and develop different types of services and products to help on this. We did in Telenor, we did a study ourselves. We are operating in Bangladesh as one of the countries where we are in. And we found out that 80% of our 85 million customers are not, also 80% of the ones with a disability are not using smartphones. They are using the feature phones also to talk, but they are not able to get access to internet and smartphones. So we started just to acknowledge what this is and started to do with some numbers. And then we have started to roll out services. I think I've used my 2 minutes now, so I come back to what those services are.
Okay, that sounds good. Great. So Ellen, can you talk about why disability inclusion and inclusive design is so important to you at Accenture? why it's a business imperative.
Sure, absolutely. Let me start also by thanking you for having me on the panel and telling you about Accenture. So we're an organization of 700,000 people serving clients all over the world. And so there are really two things that I'll talk about why it's a business imperative. And first is about the talent markets today. And the second is about all of the things that organizations need to do to really be inclusive. First, on the talent markets. The talent market has been unprecedentedly tight all over the world and in flux today. And with 1.3 billion people with disabilities, it's a talent market that cannot be overlooked. And last year, we welcomed, we grew our workforce by 100,000 people, and it would be a mistake not to include people with disabilities in our accessing new talent. And so that became really a mission for us. And let me just give you an example of something that we do. We have a program in India. We have 300,000 people in India, and we have a program in India that is a special internship program to attract people with disability. And there's a young man named Debendya who lost his hearing when he was 8 years old. And while he studied computer science, he was not clearing interviews for many, many companies. So we invited him to join our internship program, which is really about focusing on new beginnings for people, to give people job skills so that they have relevant technology skills for work. And whether they come work for Accenture or not. Well, at the end of his program, he actually started with us and now is on an incredible career path opportunity as a software developer, which is a skill in very high demand and very short supply. And I think when you think about that, it's just a talent imperative. And in an organization whose purpose is to deliver on the promise of technology and human ingenuity, you really have to build diversity, but more importantly, inclusion into your talent practices every single day.
That's great. And so last but not least, David, can you talk about the steps your organization is taking and sort of how that plays out in your industry?
Sure. So let me start with the industry. So we serve the media industry globally. So it's a $1.5 trillion business serving 7.9 billion people. And here's there's a lot of innovation, new tech, new ways to get media. But there's only 7.9 billion people. It kind of grows around 1% a year. Mature markets, 0.2%. All the tech in all the world at Meta, Facebook, Google, none of it created 1 minute of time. There's still 24 hours a day. So our job is simply to measure the share of 24 hours times 7.9 billion people. How does that work? So you got to get everybody. And it's brutally competitive with all the new ways to reach people. So people use us to figure out how to win. If you're missing 1 billion out of 8, that's a bit of a problem. So I don't believe you can compete in media without doing that. And so we do a lot to measure everyone and see what media they're accepting. And we also measure whether they're seen on the screen. I would say films have made progress, television programming not so much. Some countries are better than others. So we focused on it. I would say, so that's external. But in order to serve that market, you've also got to make sure your own population has people who are loud and proud about their disabilities. And so we formed a group called ADEPT, which is abled and disabled employees partnering together. Our biggest group is the women's group. It's the second biggest group, and it's the fastest growing. The biggest thing that caused that was when we said disabilities are not just ones you see, they're ones that are hidden. And the group got very focused on mental illness. They got very focused on the stigma around that. Their colleagues in the LGBTQ community said, you are never going to fix this unless you're out. We learned this the hard way. So we ran a campaign internally to have all employees tell the story about mental illness for themselves. Well, actually disabilities. It was all disabilities, but mental illness was 80% of it. For yourself or in your family, 1/3 of the people who work at our company wrote a blog post. It changed the dynamic completely. This in turn changed our product to make sure that mental illness is also shown as a serious issue and something people live with and work with every day. And so it's changed the way we do the ratings as well.
Let me give you just a couple of examples of how, just to build on that, how innovating around the future of work really can be transformative, not just for your own company, but for others. I'm a big believer in collaboration, so we're a very big Microsoft Teams customer. And with 700,000 people at any given time, there are hundreds of thousands of Accenture people on Microsoft Teams. And so we work with Microsoft to have our people give feedback. So our disability ERG works directly with Microsoft and provided things that became live captioning on Microsoft Teams, new themes that have the right color scheme so people can see on Microsoft Teams together. They work with Microsoft Mesh to help inform the important aspects of the metaverse, because on the metaverse continuum now, the designing from the beginning is really what's going to be a game changer to include people in this very important future of work. And finally, I'll just say that recently, we had a session with our disability ERG to get very specific feedback to Microsoft about the metaverse. And a woman named Emma, who lives with one arm, chooses not to wear a prosthetic device. But an avatar in the metaverse doesn't have that choice. You can either have two arms or one arm and a prosthetic arm. And she was very clear that she chooses to live the way she lives, and she'd like to be able to show up as her authentic self. And without giving people a voice and including them in the process, those things would not actually happen. So I think this whole concept of including your people and changing the world from the inside out is really powerful.
I think that point of inclusive design being dependent on having an inclusive workforce is incredibly important, and I'm sure we'll get back to that. Okay, so Caroline, what I want you to do is give us the big picture. So we've been talking about individual companies and industries. Where do things stand across the private sector? And give us a sense of that. And then the other thing I'd love for you to talk about before we get into other topics is, I know you've been thinking a lot about the CEO's role in all of this. So,
well, firstly, it's fantastic to be here, and an act of inclusion to everybody online. I'm just going to do a bit of an audio description. I'm an Irish white woman with blonde hair and a ludicrously pink suit today. It's fantastic to be back. And actually, I'm just going to, where's the state of the world in inclusive design? This would not have happened 5 years ago. We launched the Valuable 500 for this iconic search to find 500 companies and their CEOs, with Peter Grauer out there in the audience, with Accenture by our side as well, with Julie Sweet. And where we have to remember is how far we've come. We have an awful long way to go, but this is a continuity of building and building and building. I also want to refer to the GSMAs. So we had the very first main stage session on accessibility in February with Google and Microsoft and Apple talking together. So that point, Ellen, about collaboration and the importance of that. So that's exciting. Now, on the not so great side, in our FTSE companies, a piece of Tortoise research said 1/3 of our FTSE 100 still do not have accessible websites. I mean, how is that possible? And the importance of when you see the connection to the CEO. Here they are. Leaders make choices. Those choices create culture in the shadow and the light of a leader. If a leader is not willing to be accountable and have the intention, you don't have to know it all, but willing to go that journey, nothing will happen. Because before, it's not like companies weren't doing inclusive design or they weren't doing accessibility. It was just really piecemeal and discretionary on passion, and it wasn't connected. And if there's one thing to make the case, but we're no longer talking about the case for inclusive design, because on the other side of inclusive design is exclusion. And let's just think about that for a second. Why would you exclude customers who are worth 13 trillion out of your business and opportunities for insight and innovation? And the point of all is Steve Jobs, just for a second, mic drop. It was not something niche. It was that CEO, that founder who said, I want to create beautiful products for everyone. This isn't a disability conversation. This is inclusion by design for everyone, with pride. And yes, there's a moral imperative, and yes, there's a business opportunity, but today, and when you're hearing Ellen speaking about talent, the competition for products, and to keep our customers, you have to, it's a risk now. It's a risk. It's no longer, can you make the case for inclusive design? No, don't need to.
Right.
Don't need to.
Absolutely. And that
There is a financial business case.
Oh, there is. It's 13 trillion. No, it's 13 trillion when you look at the spending power of disability. And with a mother and a father, we'll just say, that's 54% of our global economy. Exactly to your point, David. Like 7.9, why would you leave out 1.3 billion? Like, no. So it's, and if you even think about Coda winning an Oscar, right? Look what that showed. It gets the excitement moving and going, and we need to keep saying that. But the thing I worry about is if we don't have it all right, people are so frightened to begin because they're so frightened of getting it wrong.
Yeah.
Can we just accept we're not all going to get it right when we're innovating? Because part of innovation is failure. And that needs the leaders to give permission to the business, investing in the business.
That makes so much sense. Yes.
No, just following on your passionate way of looking at this. I completely agree. The whole issue of diversity, the whole issue of inclusion has nothing to do with other things than actually business. It's hardcore business. So when I, in my intro, said that we found out that 80% of people with disability didn't use our services. Of course, that's business.
You throw it away.
Exactly. So what we did as a next step was, of course, we have several people with disabilities in our company. But as a next step, we started to invite in people that were falling outside the labor market. So we started with what we called open mind programs in several of our business units, where we invited in people with both physical and mental disabilities. We trained them for a year in Telenor, and then they could apply for jobs in Telenor or be ready for, with their resume, actually that was credible to apply for jobs outside Telenor. And we just saw how that changed the culture in Telenor, that we actually cared about those people that were not able to get an ordinary job, and then inviting them in, training them, and how that also changed the mindset on our people, the ones that make products and services. Starting to think about it from a business point of view, not from a, what should I call it, humanity point of view or doing something good point of view. This is core business.
Because you've got to connect. If you want to serve that market, you've got to have the talent in the business.
Exactly.
And that's the circle. That's the economic circle of it. So.
And they have to feel comfortable and supported
Culture.
enough to be able to ask the hard
Yes.
questions when somebody's making
And
a
I
big
go there
mistake.
myself as a CEO to talk to those that are in this 12-month program. Just to show that I care, but also to then, from the top, send a signal to the rest of the employees that this is important for us. So it starts from the top.
Can't wait for you to join the Valuable 500. Just saying.
Do you have your paper for him to sign?
So getting kind of practical for a moment,
Yeah.
what are the factors that need to be addressed first, and sort of what are the most important ones, and what's most important to keep in mind when a company is trying to address this issue in order to make it move as smoothly and as fast as possible to really get results?
Watch the fast a little bit. I think it's really important that you listen and observe. You won't get it wrong if you let the people who are empowered by their disability tell you what it means to them. The most important, one of the things I learned just this year as we were starting to reopen offices was, because we went to a hoteling concept, and that was good for a lot of people. All of our folks on the autistic spectrum, absolutely not. They needed to go back to the same place. And they told us some things that were important. We've had a number of people join us because working hybrid actually works for them. Public transportation is terrible for people with some physical disabilities. They told us ways it could work differently, but we had to just not try to rush the answer, but just shut up for a couple of months and listen. And you know, for me, learning listening skills, observation skills has been, it's made me a better leader for everybody, but we've led with this. So I think it's just really important you like zip it and listen and observe. People will tell you what to do. You won't get it wrong if you just pay attention to them.
And can I add to that, by the way, it's really hard when you get it wrong not to be defensive, to try to fix it. I mean, I'm a person, I'm registered blind, I have ocular albinism. I was working for Accenture, actually, and I never told them. You know, I didn't disclose. This is 22 years ago now, so you know, the lines on my face show that. But it's because you're not sure that you're safe. So this issue of the culture that you spoke about, getting people to tell stories, I think, please do not underestimate the power of creating space for people to tell stories, because what we know is 80% of disability is invisible. And so we estimate in our companies, in our valuable 500 companies, of which we represent 22 million employees across the world now, that anything between 10 to 13% of those 22 million employees have an invisible disability and are not disclosing. Now, how much intelligence is there right under our noses that we're not using to help inform the choices that you make as leaders in business?
Well, and I think you go beyond the 1.3 billion. What I learned is the majority of the people in the world, majority of people at Nielsen, are connected to someone with a disability, including my own family. I've got a daughter who's got borderline personality disorder. To say that proudly has been great for her and great for me, but it's changed. And I think getting rid of stigma and having everybody tell their story, you will find it's the majority of your people.
Yeah.
It's not a subset.
And I think that the whole concept of leadership, to answer your question, is super important, because modern leaders are very transparent, and transparency builds trust. And I think the way we talk about it at Accenture is progress is greater than perfection. And we're very transparent about that. And we say, we're going to try these things, and we're going to keep moving forward. We're going to make progress. And it's better than trying to get everything perfect, else we would never move forward. And so I love that. You know, you just have to have the humility to say, we might not get all of this right, but we're going to keep moving forward together.
And so what do you think are still, I mean, it feels like you're talking about a lot of progress. I know that's spotty. So what are some of the industries you think, and this is partly a question for you,
yeah, I mean,
that are really leading? I'd love to hear more about that. Like, where should we be looking for examples? And what are the industries that you think have more work to do?
So on the point of not shaming anybody, we're not going to throw anybody on the bus. So of 500 companies right now, I can say 77 come from the financial services sector. And the reason for that is because you want to keep the customer, right, from cradle to grave. So you've got to look at the life cycle of a customer. And therefore, to your point as well, like, let's remember, by 2030, 60 to 80% of the wealth is going to be controlled by people over the age of 60. So the older you get, sorry to say it, but things don't work so well, right? So that's our touch point on disability. So the financial services sector have been very strong. Originally, actually, it was the fashion sector wasn't. I mean, they were quite slow to the table. And now, I mean, what have we seen in the last 18 months? I mean, it's so fine. It's exciting seeing Gucci's campaign with Ellie Goldstein and Tommy Hilfiger and Kurt Geiger.
And friend Sinead.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is when you go, oh my gosh, this is the kind of exciting juice of it. And I think the more we see things in front of our faces, I think the more that we're adapting. And I think this point, you can't just keep underestimating different cultures, different country cultures and different contexts do affect it. So you might have Microsoft in America is very different to Microsoft experience in a country in Africa, and you have to understand that. But the intentionality, I think the intentionality has to come from the leadership from the top, and how it's locally adapted has to be, you have to understand that nuance. So, yeah. But definitely financial sector. And I think that what we also need to see is the B2Cs, it's very powerful. Like when you think about Procter & Gamble, who are making tactile designs for packaging and pregnancy tests for people who are visually impaired. And then I think that B2C, because it's so market driven, you know, I think you've got to understand there's different levers, tech industry, comms industry. So it just depends, different levers, different times.
Yeah.
No, I think there are, well, first of all, I'm very surprised when I have visited some of the people we have brought in with disabilities. I'm very surprised about their capabilities. And especially those actually that had mental disability. What they were capable of when they just came into the right setting when they had trust, when we provided them with tools that they could use. And I'm really proud to see that after 10, 12 months, they came out and were able to just do work that they wouldn't have been even thinking about before they came into this program. So I think there is a big resource, underutilized resource laying there actually for being picked up. Secondly, I think in a more and more digitalized world, I think that there are more and more that people with both physical and mental disabilities can contribute with. But it is about to make that internet or the services, digital services, possible to use for them. Practical example. We have started a service in Pakistan, for example, with people with hearing disabilities, starting to provide over internet sign language in 6 different languages. And the way that enabled a lot of people to actually learn something that they wouldn't have otherwise learned, just because they were not subject to teachers with sign languages out in the villages. That's one example. Another example is another company, Telefónica from Spain, the way they used video content to explain things in a very different way for people that were not able to read, for example, or people that were not aware of accessibility to public facilities and others. So the digitalization in itself provides new tools and new ways to actually include those with disabilities.
Right.
So I have it says we're looking for things to fix. For the advertisers in the world involved with media, we really need to push this. So the media switch where people are largely watching streaming, so algorithms show you. So people tend to see more of what they've seen before, which means they're seeing, if they're not comfortable and they haven't seen a lot of inclusive programming, they're not going to see more. We have to force the algorithms to help people see things they haven't seen before. We've got to drive discovery so that we don't end up around the world in these echo chambers, because there are people who are in a non-inclusive world. There are people in a non-disability world because they just don't see it. So I really think media's got to take more accountability, and those who fund it, which if it's ad-sponsored, ads can help. We've got to push this. We've got to help everybody see what they don't see.
That's really interesting. I'd never thought about it quite that way. So staying on the challenge side, what do you think are the biggest challenges? I mean, we've made a sudden leap in progress, but there's still so much to do. What are the biggest challenges still facing inclusive design now?
Well, I'll talk forever, so please give somebody else a talk. Well, from my perspective, the shift has to go from niche and the singular idea that it's for people with disabilities. Inclusive design means design for all. And we can't forget that exclusion costs. It financially costs, it morally costs, but it costs OECD countries 7%. And I still don't think that's landing. Exclusion is costing our societies in our heads and our hearts. And sometimes I think that when we think about inclusive design, it's discretion or it's passion-based. But let's remember, text messaging was designed for people who are hearing impaired, right? Or hard of hearing and deaf. And it's for everyone. And I think we need to look at this now as it's not an invitation, it's essential. And that needs to be driven from our leadership. And it really does, to be invested in it strategically, right across all the different functions of the business. And if that doesn't happen, it's just going to keep bunny hopping around, because what I've noticed, as we all have in the inclusion and belonging and diversity space, we still are seeing the tension between pillars like LGBTQI competing with gender, competing with race, and that is ridiculous. Inclusive design is for everyone, and it needs everyone's voices at the beginning of the process. Inclusion by design baked in at the beginning of the process, not after and coming in and getting consultation, but right from the beginning. And if we don't do that, as we're building this new metaverse, I mean, how do we do that if we're not getting the voices at the table at the beginning?
And that one's a huge opportunity.
So I would add, in our world, what we're trying to do is watch the language.
Yeah,
so
great.
we talk a lot about winning because And winning, we measure market share, so winning by winning market share, because then you have to start with the total market, and this is about big segments. I'm very wary of terms like ally, because that implies I'm helping someone who needs help. Disabled people don't need allies. They need you to get out of the way and listen to them. So it's about voices. And so I think the more we do to actually make this about winning, giving everybody a voice so that you're not losing a part of your workforce or you're not losing a part of your market, is the way I think people get there. I do agree with you. We're not going to get there if it is viewed as an incremental thing. No. You got to start over. You got to say, yeah, this is the total market.
And join the dots. Like, can you believe in the war in the Ukraine, we're still not seeing inclusive emergency aid? Is our philanthropy, is our contribution as fund, is it inclusive of? So you think about people in the Ukraine, who's left? Are we designing our emergency systems to help people? So it's trying to be mindful in everything that we do. It's joining the dots. And if we don't join the dots, actually in everything that we do, I think that's where we tear away so much of the progress.
Ellen, were you?
Yeah, I just think that I'm a big believer in education. And just by the very fact that in 2019, this was the first time that at the World Economic Forum this discussion was had. That on the main stage. Yeah. And I think that there's a long way to go in educating people. One of the facts that came out of our research was that to fix a product to be inclusive after it's been designed costs 10,000 times more. 10,000 times more. What business leader would not listen to that and start to figure out how to build products for all? And I think that education has a long way to go, and I think your organization can change the world, really, through that.
Well, it's you having this, imagine this 500 times. No, but seriously, system change can happen, simple acts being done multiple times, all these organizations learning from each other, because none of us have it right?
And collaboration does accelerate the pace of change.
But I can't wait till you compete. I love competitive collaboration right now. But when you start poaching each other's disabled talent or inclusive design talent, win. When you stop collaborating and competing, win. And one thing that is really scary, in our Fortune 500 companies, we only have 6 chief accessibility officers. 6. So that's what I'm saying. That is the biggest risk if we don't push this right up to the business, to the voice of the leadership.
David.
I wanted to build back on the education point, because I think this is also a learning we've had, is be careful of formal education. For a number of reasons, formal college education isn't the path for everybody with a disability. It's not designed for them. It needs to be redesigned.
For everybody, whether you have a disability.
Exactly. I think the more we're looking at skills, the less we're looking at degrees, the more we're going to find that we find so much new talent to bring in. And I think this, back to inclusion, it's got to go all the way down to that. Let's include people on their skill set and build their skills.
So I'd love to throw it out to all of you if you have any questions. Yes. Do we have a... There we go.
Excellent. Thank you for this discussion. My question is for executives in companies, each of you running a business. The idea of a fixed disability, you have a diagnosis, you know exactly what it is, it acts the same way at all times, seems to be so far where our conversation has been sitting, but many people with disabilities have quite changing conditions outside of mental health, but physical health, where they might have very unpredictable things happening. And my question is, as managers of businesses, how do you create accommodation for people who might have really sudden, severe, unexpected episodes, want to keep a job and persistence with a company and colleagues, but actually might need extended and unpredictable times out?
I'll take that to start. At Accenture, we have something called the Global Accessibility Tool, which sounds very basic, but I believe it was the first tool of its kind. And it allows our people, all 700,000 people, to get the accommodations that they need, whether they've disclosed a disability or not. It can range from someone needs sign language to whatever it is that they need. And the power of it, I believe, is that it's centrally funded. So, you know, all countries that we operate in don't get to say, I can't afford to do this. Julie, our CEO, our chairman and CEO, is committed to providing these accommodations, and they can range from whatever people need, and they change, just as you say. And that freedom to come forward and ask for help, we say it very simply. At Accenture, asking for help is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. And I think by just giving that access to people has really been game-changing and has made us an employer of choice. Because people know they'll be welcome and they'll have the tools and support, whatever that may be, that they need.
And can I just say, to your point, thank you for bringing that up, because 80% of disability is acquired. And that's between the ages of 18 and 64, which is the workforce state. And you're absolutely correct. And the only way that we can help move this dial forward is creating those cultures of trust. I know it's becoming like, you know, a bandied around word, but these cultures of trust where we have the storytelling, where we have people speaking to different experiences, and this centralized approach to accommodations. And can I just say, accommodations before the pandemic were seen as expensive. Well, we can't accommodate. And then we're going through COVID, and every single person needed an accommodation, right? You didn't have to have a disability to have an accommodation. And that centralized approach is a game changer. It is a game changer because it means that you as a person doesn't have to keep coming out all the time and having to justify yourself, which is incredibly exhausting. So yeah, really good point.
I think sorry, go ahead. I'll just add one thing, because this is something that we added to the accommodation tool, which is our accessibility centers. We have 19 of them now, and with people returning back to offices, we'll have 40 by the end of August. What are those? You get to, if you need some assistive device, so for example, we have a woman in the Philippines who doesn't have hearing, and she needs an assistive device. She went into our accessibility center, physical center, and tried 30 devices. She didn't just go into the tool and said, I need an assistive device, and we mailed her something. No, she went in, got to choose something for herself on multiple factors. Does it work? Can I hear better? Does it look like I want it to work? Can I take it home with me? And those things, making it hyper-personalized, are so validating for our people. They just really feel human. And after all, isn't that how we want all people to feel as human beings?
I just want to come back on the, because your point about things come and go. The best way we found to deal with that is through a lot of manager training. And back to keeping people competitive, our managers compete on how inclusive they are because people, we survey everybody. Did you feel accommodated? Could you achieve your full potential? Did you feel respected at work? There's some things that are important. I just think there's no substitute for managers who listen. Central programs only go so far if managers aren't 100% in sync with them. And what you're describing is really where the managers are important. People have to be able to say, I need 2 weeks, and the manager's gonna say, I get it. If it's gotta go through some system, it's gonna fall apart.
Can I just pick up on that? Just a really personal story that happened about 10 days ago. I was flying to Tokyo, so I had to go for a particular PCR test. It's a really well-known clinic in Dublin. And I went in the door. This is such a small thing, but it's to your point. And I can't fill in a form. And I just said, look, I'm going to need some help filling in a form because I'm vision impaired. And the person behind the cursed a good few blue Irish words and threw her eyes up to heaven. And in that moment, it's been a while, obviously, because I haven't come out, and I was so shocked, and everybody else in the room was so shocked. And all that had required is that the people would have had training. When somebody like me would come in, so she was embarrassed, I was embarrassed. It was a whole thing, and it was so simple. Yep. That it's just, we all have different needs, whether you can see, whether you can hold a pen, you know, that I wasn't a burden to. And that's the feeling that comes often with having to constantly advocate within a business. So yeah, training is huge. Actually, PCR tests are all very inaccessible anyway. I don't know anybody else between spitting and
For a
all
question
the
right
bits.
here.
Shanti.
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful discussion. I must make a comment that Accenture has supported something which is designed for disability. And it has to do with a rural social networking platform called Enable Vani. And in fact, we run it in India, and it is on obviously using a simple phone. And so my question actually is that there are two things here. One is designing for disability. You may be doing it yourself, and whatever you've said, you're practicing it. Two areas, supply chain, everything that you take. I will tell you every single manufacturer. That's what you're doing, right, with Microsoft Teams. You know that they will listen to you, and you're not going to procure it. So I just want to know more about how your supply chain and your procurement is inclusive. If not, if that can be in your policy, then everybody who is your vendor is going to design for disability. Point number one. And second is communities, which is what Accenture has done with us, right? You've supported communities by having a design for disability, and now 90%, we have almost millions of calls on this rural platform, which is moderated, and a person with disability is solving another person's problem. And all you required was they use a simple phone, they just do an IVR, and you're done. So just if I could ask that question to everybody on supply chain and the community.
Can I just give two examples to the second point? The first one is called CRISP. It's a tool. And we have a business in Accenture called Accenture Song. They do a lot of content. And they developed an artificial intelligence tool that helps designers of, let's say, websites make sure the content is optimized for consumers. Do their eyes go to the right place? Are the colors appealing? But the most incredible thing that they did is they built into the artificial intelligence the YCAG standards, so that as the designers are designing these tools, these websites, because only 3% of the internet is accessible, they are feeding back to the designers in real time how to make the consumer websites accessible from the beginning. And they actually can adjust their designs in real time against all of the standards in YCAG. And if that isn't inclusive product development to create community around, I don't know what. And I'm just going to share one more example of a product because it's so heartwarming. And it's called VIME. And it stands for Visually Impaired Makeup Experience. And our lab, which does applied innovation, created an artificial intelligence mirror that helps women who live with blindness apply their makeup. And why is that important? Because it's very difficult, if not impossible, to feel like you can do that yourself and go out. And this tool, I watched a video of it, helps the women apply and correct their makeup. And at the end, it says, you look beautiful and you're ready to go. But those are things that allow people to participate in communities that never were able to participate before. And for me, that whole theme is creating value by leading with values.
That's a good example of a product that I think would be needed far beyond visually impaired community. I could use it, seriously, because my eyesight's declining and it's really hard to put makeup on.
So Shanti, I would say, first I just want to be honest that our supply chain focus has been on racial and gender diversity, and I think that you're doing something great and I want to learn more. So I just want to be clear, for me, it's a great idea. On the community part, where we are bigger advocates, and it comes as our work, our work to measure market share starts with census. So we're spending time with the census bureaus of the governments around the world to make sure that everyone's counted. And it's funny because right now we're dealing with the rebuilding in Ukraine, because we're in every community in Ukraine and we're operating it, but I actually think Ukraine's gonna be a place when they come back, let's make sure they're all there. And I think the government census is really important for us to take on in India and Pakistan, so that's the part we're doing that I'd love to work with you on.
We are totally out of time. So I am going to take 10 seconds to say thank you to everyone. I think the most important things are it has to come from the top down, you have to listen, and you have to do it. Everybody has to do this. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to this amazing panel.